The survey went out to area business leaders as well as a small consumer group to look at plans for the future in terms of staff hiring and brick and mortar needs and an abundance of other topics so that Springfield could use this as a planning tool. One of the most important things that came out of the 2019 survey was a business confidence index. And we were continuing along that line with a 2020 survey, and just days after completing the 2020 survey, we were fraught with COVID-19 in our community, and that drastically changed results. So again, in partnership with Prosperity Partners, Springfield Business Journal decided to go out with a second survey. I want to thank all who participated in that, and that's really what today's conversation is about. Is we have a very unique opportunity in this community to see the change that took place because of COVID. And I think that uniquely positions us to be ahead of the curve in terms of recovery and really planning that recovery. I want to thank and congratulate the Springfield Business Journal management team for making the decision to release the data that had been collected so that it could be used to the benefit of area businesses in those recovery efforts. And so today's conversation is about releasing that data and making sure that each of you have that. I want to recognize all of our partners that have been with us and that will continue to be with us for these conversations that will take place over the remainder of 2020. OTC Center for Workforce Development, H Design Group, Bryan Properties, Ollis Acres Arney, and Tothan Associates. All should be thanked for this. And now I want to introduce you to Titus Williams with a brief video from Prosperity Partners.
Welcome to the 2020 Growth Survey. This is our second year for the Growth Survey. Last year, we went through the process of evaluating and sending out surveys to different business leaders and community leaders and also other individuals and citizens to see what everyone believed the economy was and what was people were experiencing in our market. This year we have experienced a significant circumstance that is unique in nature, and I believe something that is allowed us to use this growth survey to see what we as business and community leaders and citizens of Springfield and the Springfield surrounding areas to see what the economy was before a pandemic, and then because a pandemic happened recently after our initial growth survey, it gave us an opportunity to then send out a second survey during the pandemic, which allowed us to gauge what people were experiencing in their businesses and in our community. This year, we've been able to send out some information that has allowed us to get information from different business leaders. So because of us being in this unique time, we are probably one of the only communities in the United States that have gone through this survey before the pandemic and during a pandemic. So this is a unique opportunity for us as citizens of Springfield and individuals participating in the Growth Survey. Myself, it's been an opportunity to see other people's input, and even before the pandemic and during the pandemic, it has allowed me to kind of gauge what our business is doing, and then allows me to evaluate different aspects of our business. And now we are going to look at some of the results from our growth survey. We are going to be asking participants to give their input on specific things that we are evaluating, and also to see how individuals and business leaders in our community are handling this situation and what the potential future looks like for our community. If you could participate in all the different questions, any input that you give allows for the greater good. So please participate.
Thank you so much to Titus for those words. As he indicated, we are looking for participation in this discussion. Unfortunately, we're not having it in person, but we will still have many opportunities for you to participate via Q&A. And also, we are doing a live polling that you will see pop up during this presentation. So I want to give you those instructions right off the bat. If you will use another tab or another device to go to pollev, that's POLLEV.com. And when you've arrived at that site, you can simply enter Jennifer Jack, JENNIFER JACK 977, so that as questions are served to you during our conversation today, you'll be able to weigh in. And then again, after the presentation that we have this afternoon, there will be Q&A. So you have an opportunity on your chat feature to ask questions that you would like posed in the Q&A following today's presentation. So with that, our format today, we will have the presentation of data that will come from Jerry Henry. He is CEO of H2R Market Research. H2R Market Research has been with us from the beginning. They, along with a steering committee, hi Jerry. But H2R Market Research, along with a steering committee, helped us design the survey that was given this year and last year. And Jerry brings 25 years of experience in market research and expertise. He's a delightful presenter too, Jerry. So welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you and let us take us through the data. And then after that, of course, you'll be joined with a colleague, Ashley Garoutte, and with editorial director Eric Olson for that Q&A session. So I'm going to give it to you, Jerry.
All righty. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Let's see if I can, there we go. Very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. You know, I think we all face this formidable challenge of trying to get all of our customers back, and do it in a manner that's as safe as possible, while trying to be as profitable as possible, and doing it all with any kind of management or marketing playbook whatsoever. To say this is an unprecedented situation, is a little bit of an understatement. The fact is, all of our life's experiences up to this point has not adequately prepared us for the moment that we find ourselves in now. Rearview mirror is, well, pretty useless. So in this environment, about the only thing we can hope to get is what we think and what our customers think, the marketplace thinks, and what our peers think. And that's what we're talking about today. As I said, my name is Jerry Henry. I am the CEO of H2R Market Research. We are a full service customized research firm located right here in Springfield, Missouri. As fate would have it, we actually, one of our specialties is disaster recovery research. We've been doing this for a long time, so we've actually had the opportunity to study the impact of 9/11 on consumers, but also we've looked at tornadoes and hurricanes and wildfires and the Great Recession, gasoline spikes and what have you. But I'll be the first to tell you, we have no experience with pen. I'm old, but I'm not that old. However, because we have worked with a variety of disasters over time, we do have a feel for how customers react, how the marketplace reacts when there's an uncertainty going on and a great fear. Likewise, since the pandemic began in early to mid-March, we've been doing a nationwide consumer study every week to try to gauge how customers are reacting, how the marketplace is reacting to an unprecedented pandemic. And this month, we will have launched different recovery preparedness surveys for destinations, attractions, airports, hospitality industry. And today, we're talking about the business community right here in Springfield, Missouri. So with that, I'm gonna try to get her to move forward. They say try to get her to move forward. There we go. I know how much you guys love methodology. I do too. So I'm gonna spend a few, no, I'm kidding. I'm gonna get through this pretty fast. But we have done the research for the past 2 years. It debuted last year in the Springfield Business growth survey. And we really thought that growth survey name would probably last us for a very, very, very long time. But sitting here today, growth might not be the appropriate term, but be that as it may. We did the study last year, learned a lot, and honestly, the data is good, but what really brought it to life last summer were the series of community forums that Springfield Business Journal hosted with partners. And hearing business leaders across the community talk about specific data points and what it meant to them and how it impacted the community, I think is when it really comes to life, like opportunities like this. Well, anyway, we have repeated it this year. We do data collection in February, same as we had done last year. And as Jennifer said, we literally just got it in. The ink was not dry when, boom, pandemic. Well, so for a few weeks, we're trying to determine, okay, is this thing going to pass real quickly? And, you know, it didn't take long for all of us to realize, no, this is not passing real quickly. So we realized we had a challenge here, but we also had an opportunity because we had just recorded what business leaders in Springfield were thinking just a few weeks prior. And now we're sitting here in early April, and we took the opportunity to go out with a second wave and find out what were business leaders thinking right after the pandemic had hit a few weeks later. So early to mid-March is when this second wave occurred. And that's what we're talking about today. So forging the path forward, as I think we can all agree that COVID turned our world upside down. It's a game changer. So in this study, it provides some context into how others are feeling, what do the averages look like. I'm not in this just by myself. What information are other businesses needing and wanting, and insights in terms of what trends they're looking for, best practices that we'll talk about. But one of the key things of both last year's study and this one, and even after the fact, is indeed the whole Business Confidence Index and all the pieces that go into that. You know, when we were sitting back there in February talking about this, things were looking pretty good. For the most part, the economy was sailing along, and most of us expected our business sectors to do just fine this year. Last year, so in 19, 61% of businesses in the Springfield area felt that, yeah, their business sector was going to see improvement in 2019. And in 2020, just a couple months ago, 58% felt they were going to see improvement. And, you know, statistically, that's just pretty much the same. And then likewise, in both years, only 6% thought that there was going to be a decline in their business sector. So if you take the net of that, that is, if you take the 58% minus the 6, you get a plus 52. So overall, it was a net plus 55 last year, plus 52. It was looking pretty good. Over half of the businesses in the area expected their sector to improve. So things are going pretty good, right? Well, no. Then comes mid-March, and we find ourselves in the middle of a pandemic, and things change fairly fast. And so instead of over half of us expecting our business sector to have a net increase, we drop all the way to only 16% now, expecting that we have a net increase. But I got to tell you, I think plus 16% pretty good. It's good to know that a net 16% of the business community in the area expects that they're still going to eke out a gain in their entire business sector this year. So could have been worse, maybe. But we also asked specifically in your business, this was early, so this is like in February, asking, what do you think is going to happen over the next 60 days to your revenues? So this is roughly from mid-April to mid-June. So we're not quite through that. But this period, the average respondent told us that they expected their revenues to drop 31%. Key thing here is every type of business, every different segments, whether it's B2C, B2B, services, goods, every sector was hit because pretty much everything closed down. So none of us really escaped all of this mess. Flipping back and forth, though, we also talked about the workforce within business confidence. And last year, workforce was probably the single biggest topic that we had. And that is, you know, we're all in need of good labor. And really in February of this year, 50% of businesses in Springfield were saying that they intended to increase the number of employees at their business in the Springfield market in 2020. 50%. Whether they follow through or not, it's one thing, but at that snapshot in time, that was their intentions. And this was, again, across every type of business segment we look at here. So goods, services, nonprofits, private. Everybody was expecting fairly good increases in labor, or at least seeking new employees. But once again, pandemic hit, and that changed things. And so now we have nearly half, or 45%, saying, just trying to not make any changes necessarily, not wanting to rock the boat. 21% hoping to hang on to my best employees. But 20% are still planning to take the opportunity to pick up employees that may have been displaced from other jobs. And only 12% said that they're likely to jettison some employees in the whole aftermath of this. So I think this is another positive sign for the Springfield business community that in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic, first in our generation, frankly, first in multiple generations, I think it's a positive thing that we still have 20% that are planning to add employees in the middle of this. So we have the business sector that we've talked about, and then we have the workforce. And the other element that we included in the business index is our confidence in the local economy. How do we think Springfield is going to perform overall? Last year, 43% felt in the spring of 19 that it was going to be a good year, and that the Springfield economy would improve over the course of 2019. And only 6% expected it was going to get worse. We rolled that out in February. We collected new data. Our 43% had dropped to 39, so it's down just a little bit. And our 6% had increased to 8%, and the economy to worsen just a little bit. So I think it's safe to say that there was a small decline in confidence in the local economy, but not major. It was just a small notable tick downwards, but still, most segments, as you can see, large, small, private, nonprofit goods and services, for the most part, everyone kind of saw the world about the same way, and that we were pretty confident in the economy until mid-March. And so when we go out, and this is probably the largest decline, in that we were up, a positive 31% net expectations for the economy, and it dropped to net 63%. So net 63% of the businesses in Springfield expect the economy to worsen in this year. And again, I got to tell you, I think that's a pretty positive thing, because I wouldn't have been surprised had that been 90% expect the local economy to get worse over the course of 2020. So, a negative 63% compared to where we were is certainly significantly lower, but frankly, probably not as low as I might have hypothesized in mid-April. And so when we put all those together and we create the index from the combination of what's happening in your business sector, what are you thinking with workforce, and then what do you expect with the local economy, our index, which had dropped from 146 down to 142.8, plummeted all the way down to 81.7. Again, could be worse, pretty sizable drop. Honestly, glad we've been measuring both last year, earlier this year, and now hopefully the bottom at 81.7. We'll just see how that breaks out for us now as we go. Had a variety of other questions that I think are relevant for the business community in Springfield regarding COVID-19. One of the things I found perhaps more interesting than in general, because I had no idea what to expect, was how many filed for the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program loan, Government CARES Act. As I'm sure you know, this is a loan that if you get it, a sizable portion, if not all, can be forgiven as long as you keep your full-time employees employed and use 75% of the funds on payroll-related expenses. So over half applied for that in Springfield. 68% instituted a work-from-home policy, and 25% told us that they reduced employees' hours in an effort to conserve resources. Beyond that, if you add up, furloughs and layoffs and reduced hours, reduced pay, outright eliminating jobs, 39% of our business respondents in the study indicated that they took some form of action that decreased employee wages one way or another. And so, well, I think most of the results here in a bad situation are pretty positive. We do still have, that 39% that of the business in the area had to take action to try to decrease the cost and do their best to break even, which is fairly sizable, and it could challenge. It's certainly going to impact our recovery and the length and time of that recovery. Another question we asked, which I think is pretty insightful to the average, and this is one I think it's kind of helpful to have some context that others fit, is cash on hand. That is, we're asking how long can you make it in these current circumstances with the cash? On average, they told us about 12 weeks, which is really a long time for small businesses. A study done by JP Morgan Chase, I believe it was last year, had found that the average small business nationwide only has about 27 days of cash. Now that's a median, and we're talking about an average, but still pretty simple. So that's a pretty large number at 12 weeks. But I will point out one thing, actually two things here. You'll notice that 25% said, you know what, I don't really know. And frankly, in mid-April, it's a pretty good point in that many just didn't know. So keep that in mind, because we don't know which direction or how they would have responded. And then also we have, if you look over here to the right, the bottom bar there, that our large businesses, over half of our big businesses told us that they could survive 6 or more months. So they tend to be well capitalized. And so with those two issues, and that a large number didn't know, and that a sizable number of large companies, it probably helps skew that upward toward the 12 weeks. But still positive news overall that, we are here in the Midwest. We tend to be a little bit more conservative. We have a little red hen nature, I think, to most of us. And so still positive news any way we spend that. Another question that's just interesting to see where people's heads were at is, how long do you think it's going to take us to get to this new normal, or as McKinsey calls it, the next normal? And at the time, in mid-April, they told us it was going to take about 16 weeks. So that would put us, sometime in August is what they thought. I don't know how people would respond if they were asked the same question today, but I do know that among consumers, that we also were asking the same question in mid-April, that in the 6 weeks since then, we do know that among consumers, that time frame just gets longer and longer and longer. And so among consumers, it's now up to 35 weeks. More importantly, that was a 68% increase from their perception in mid-April. So if that applied to this data, would probably put us closer to 6 months. Not saying it would, I'm not trying to put words in your mouths or what have you, but my hunch would be that if businesses were answering the same question today, the amount of time to that next normal is going to be a little longer than they originally thought. Along these same lines, we ask, how far of a planning horizon do you have? How far are you able to look out? Generally, we expect businesses, you used to say 5 to 10 years, but that really doesn't help a whole lot anymore. But you tend to see 3 to 5, and some that maybe is, depending on the types of business, can only look out 1. But right now, in the middle of a pandemic with this much uncertainty, we're sitting at about 14 weeks, which would put us from about mid-April to sometime in the middle of July. And my guess is that's probably about right. It's difficult to look out a whole lot further than that, given how fast things continue to change in the marketplace and our business sectors. So we're sitting here in mid-April, and we're saying, we're already starting to realize that things are going to change, that life is probably not going to be exactly the same. And I think the best I've heard is, I don't know that we can go back, but we will most certainly move forward. And I'm confident we will do that. But in moving forward, things may not look exactly the same. And as these business leaders were hypothesizing, things like online video conferencing, like we're doing right now, and working from home, things that are probably going to become more popular in the future, because now that we become familiar with it, it's kind of a way of life, along with online sales. Probably going to continue, not just sales, pretty much a lot of moving online. And that's probably going to continue to be the way of the world. Unfortunately, that comes with some things that we're probably going to stop doing as well. And highlighted there would be things like business travel, meetings and conventions, conferences that we might go to, even in-person staff meetings. The business leaders were saying that might be an area that we slow down on. We also looked at this in terms of, okay, right in the middle of the crisis, and by golly, we were in the middle of the crisis in mid-April. We're asking, so what is it you need? What kind of insights would be the most helpful for you to understand, to know, for you to digest now? And the number one thing they told us, God bless you all, is that you wanted data, statistics, community performance information, which makes sense. We want to know what's going on. We need as many KPIs as we can get. Then likewise, publishing news and insights about how other companies' best practices, what's working, what's not. When you are in unprecedented situation, you know what you're doing, but everybody's looking around to find out what's going to be the new normal, and of that, what's working really well for them and what's not working as well, because I don't want to make the same mistake. And likewise, you know, what other types of state or local community help is out there for small businesses? Because again, it was a struggle when everything closes down and we're in a lockdown for a while. That was asked in the crisis before recovery hits. And then we came back and we asked the question, so well, what would be helpful? What's going to be most important to you once we start to get up into recovery? Not recovery has happened, but when recovery is on the horizon. And in my estimation, it's going to be on the horizon for a fairly long period of time. But there they pivoted and said, you know, what we're going to need once we get into the recovery is got to know what our consumers are going to most want or expect from this brave new world we find ourselves in. That is, behaviors are going to change, profiles are going to change, and we're going to find ourselves in a completely different situation. And the second one is we also need to know what our employees are wanting, expecting, needing from a new world as well. And then the third was new governance models. And if you guys have a better word for this, I would love to hear it. But what we're talking about here is changes in the design of the guest experience, of the customer experience. This is things like putting more hand sanitizer out and marking off 6 foot so that they can social distance, or capping the attendance by occupancy or the numbers in the business. There's tons of new ones out there. Depending on the type of business that you go to, you're going to see a lot of different opportunities and unique things going on. And we're all still looking around trying to determine which of these are going to work best, which will be most accepted, and then unfortunately, which will our type of customer be most likely to follow. So these are the things that at the top of the list, but all pretty good, because frankly, right now we need a lot of information because we don't know exactly where we're going to end up. There are also a few areas I wanted to touch on, that these were important area issues that really have nothing to do with COVID, but I think are relevant here. This first one was talking about, you know, a year's now passed between 19 and 20. So which issues have improved? Which issues have stayed the same, and which frankly have gotten a little worse? And at the top of the list, for looking back for the last 12 minutes, it was access to skilled workers. We are having trouble finding skilled workers to fill the jobs that we had. Remember, 50% were planning to hire new folks, and they're looking out there and say, wow, it's the labor market's not exactly brimming over right at the moment. And the other one was cost of doing business, was also edging upward and creating somewhat of a challenge. On the good side, though, they felt that air service to the area had improved, access to capital had improved. So we're moving forward in a variety of issues that that workforce issue, those skilled workers, frankly, is a topic that we heard in 19 and even going into that. We had heard in other conversations that were going around the community. Yeah, that's been an issue. And so then asked, what do you think will be the most important issues looking forward for the next 5 years that are going to face the Springfield community? And business leaders told us, well, it's going to continue to be attracting new customers for everybody's business. Makes sense. Talent and acquisition, retention, keeping them, it's an ongoing challenge in this marketplace. Makes sense. Getting a skilled workforce is a challenge. Changes in technology, attracting more businesses to the Springfield region. That's what people were thinking in February. And frankly, I don't know that a whole lot of those would necessarily change now, although it'll be interesting when we do this again. Lastly, what could government do to assist us? The number one thing was improving safety and infrastructure is top priority. That may still be the same, although it may have a little bit more broader context. Reducing business property taxes was also the number 3rd issue. And looking at the current situation, I don't think that's going to happen anytime too soon. But it was pointed out last year. Likewise, streaming permits, reducing development charges, all saw the largest increases in government help requests that we saw last year and before the pandemic. So, get to the end of all this. My biggest takeaways from here is that we really are all in this together. And I know, it's a cliche. You've heard it by virtually every advertiser on television for the last 10 weeks. But let me repurpose the idea here, and that is we all hit a brick wall in the middle of March. It's not that any of us were necessarily bad business people. We just had an unprecedented situation that caused our revenues to fall a projected 31% over 2 months. So it is nice to have some context that, it's not just my business, it's not just my type of business, but we're all in this together, meaning, yeah, we're all taking it pretty much on the chin this year. Likewise, I think contextually, it's good to know that half applied for PPP. And while I don't think this is a great thing, it's important for us to recognize that nearly 4 in 10 businesses also had to take some form of action that reduced employment wages. Planning horizon, about 14 weeks. Cash on hand, about 12 weeks, but that included a whole bunch of I don't knows and skewed a little bit to large businesses. Trends that are concerning is less business travel expected, fewer meetings and conventions, while more video conferencing, more working from home. Both of those are going to have implications for different business sectors as a domino effect occurs along the way. Outlook for the local economy, it's considerably lower, but how could it be anything else? The reality is sitting at an index of 82, dropped 60 points. That's a lot, but I think Springfield's resilient. I think this study shows that that's exactly where we are, and that we too will come back from this. And I think one of the biggest indications of that is I think the community's still pretty bullish on talent. Skilled workforce has been an issue for us for several years in a row, and so there are definitely going to be some that see this as an opportunity to get that skilled labor that they've had a tougher time getting over the last few years, and so they're taking it as an opportunity. And quite frankly, I think winners and losers in this whole thing are going to be defined by how we make our bets. Are you betting on buying up new property or more capital or more labor, or betting against it? And winners and losers are probably going to trade based on how those bets turn out. That is my presentation, but I think we're going to have Eric join us. Is that right?
Yes, that's right, Jerry. Thank you for the detailed presentation, and I'm glad to join you on this panel. I'm also going to welcome Ashley Garoutte, your colleague, a data analyst with H2R Market Research. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, how are you guys today?
Very good. Welcome. I want to say hi to our viewing audience and glad you guys are participating with the taking in all of this data and beginning to learn where we're at, what we can do to advance as a business community within our own offices, but then also, as you saw with Jerry's presentation, some outlook that is more of a community-wide focus. And we'll transition with the two of you here at this point to a short Q&A. And also, meanwhile, we'll be doing the live polling that Jennifer mentioned in her welcome at Poll EV. And you can see there how to log on and answer those questions. But Jerry and Ashley, I want to begin our chat here with maybe some silver linings in this challenging environment, everything surrounding the pandemic and the economic shutdown. What are the bright spots in these numbers? What do you look to?
Well, Jerry, if you don't mind, I'll start really quick. For me, the biggest bright spots are the fact that the Springfield area is fairly confident in how long we can last with cash on hand. Looking at it compared to the nationwide average of 27 days, and we're at 12 weeks, and we're already well into that 12 weeks because we surveyed in mid-April, and I've seen a lot more confidence lately, and I've seen the Springfield area start to open up, and so I have confidence that number may actually shorten, and that we're looking well on our way to that recovery.
Cash on hand. Jerry, anything that pops out to you as those silver lining pieces?
Yeah, there were a couple things. I totally agree with Ashley that the cash on hand is a positive thing. But I got to tell you that still the net plus 16%. So that's 16% of the businesses that we're talking to still felt that their sector was going to eke out a gain. Now, obviously, grocery stores have done well in this, and pharmacies, I think, have probably done fairly well in big box stores. So there are definitely online sales, definitely segments that are doing well. But somehow or other, I got caught up into, wow, we're going to see all negatives and what have you. And it was refreshing. It was a wake-up call for me to see that was still positive. It's a net positive 16. I take that as a good news. And then likewise, I think the fact that 20% of area businesses are going to take this opportunity to hire new employees is likewise a very positive thing. And that is, yep, we took a hit to the chin. We're down, but we're not out. And I think that's
within those positive points there, can you connect that data to the types of businesses that you see were best prepared to weather this storm right now? You mentioned online sales. So if you were already, yes, full in on e-commerce, probably sitting pretty good. But what other types of businesses, either by industry or size, do you think was best prepared for this?
Good question. And that I may let Ashley tackle, but I'm going to take a slightly different track. And that is, I think businesses that have a large number of employees that are self-starters, entrepreneurially minded, they do real well from working from home and what have you, are going to just ignite because this was really in their wheelhouse. So it's something we don't typically think of, but we have our mix of talent, and then boom, everything changed. So that could create opportunities or challenges for businesses based on the type of employee that you have psychographically. Likewise, large organizations, those that have more employees, tend to be better capitalized. And so at 30,000 feet, the smaller guys, not because they're not equally as brilliant, but they're just simply not as big. It's a little tougher to last for months and months and months and months. And then the other one I would say, as we look at like state governments and some attractions that rely on a lot of donations, anything that's requiring funding from non-customers, so from the federal government, from the state government, the local government, or from donations, I think it's going to be a tough year because most of those sources have been negatively impacted too, and I'm fearful of the domino effect.
As you were chatting and answering that, Jerry, the live polling showed supporting what I think the survey drew out. The hardest hit industries were tourism and retail. But except maybe if you're online retail and have a stronghold there, you might be doing pretty good, as you said. I like how you answered in the maybe the changing of company culture. So if you were a business who wasn't necessarily stacked with self-starters, as you say, maybe that's a cue for some companies to look at that, or maybe reinvent the makeup of their staffing and how they're hiring. And we know what 20% of companies are still looking to hire right now, correct?
Mhm. That's correct.
So there's some opportunity there, perhaps. A key component of the survey now in this second year is the Springfield Business Confidence Index. It's exclusive to us in this survey. We introduced it with your work last year, and it was a strong showing in confidence last year in the 140s, again in February, right out of the gate, 140 Business Confidence Index. A little different story, now down to 81.7, and that's seems to be understandable, but I think what's the real question surrounding that number at this point? How do we use that as a comparison tool? Is it to see how far it's going to take us to close the gap to get back to that baseline of 100, or what else might be we wanting to see with that number? Jerry or Ashley?
So there are several things, like Jerry talked about earlier, that go into the Business Confidence Index, and that includes confidence in the local economy, how we think our business sectors are going to change, whether improve or decline over the next year, and then our workforce expectations for hiring in the next 12 months. And so because there's all these things going into that, one thing can really affect it. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, all three of those things were negatively impacted. And so I think it's just going to take some time as things get back to normal for us to see that gap closing in. And I believe we are planning on surveying again as things continue to change, so we can see if that confidence is going up, and the conversations that we have on how the business community can work together to get through the pandemic, I think will increase our confidence and increase that Business Confidence Index.
Very good. As you were answering that, we saw another poll EV question pop up, and I also want to invite our viewing audience to ask some questions of you guys. You can use the chat function below. You should see an icon in a dialog box, or you can type in your question. I've seen one come in already, and I'll ask those of our panelists at the conclusion of the Q&A here. Most alarming numbers, maybe. Let's transition into that area. The previous live poll was asking about greatest concerns for revenue, and city revenue was obviously with sales tax diminishing at a rapid rate. That's going to be a troubling spot to get out of the rest of the year. What other alarms are ringing when you look at this data?
I would say that the economy is largely tied to consumer confidence, and consumer confidence is largely tied to the trajectory of new cases and hospitalizations of the virus itself. So unrelated to the survey, I am concerned in Greene County that the spike in cases that we've had over the last couple of weeks, because I think as those cases go, it tends to have a drag on confidence, which is then going to impact the local economy as well. But focusing more beyond that, other things that I think are alarming, because Springfield does so well with meetings and conventions across the entire region. I think if business travel gets hurt, and ultimately that then extends into meetings and conventions that don't occur, it's a thing that Springfield competes very efficiently with in the region. And if those start to dry up, I think that's going to be another source of revenue that right now we can rely on people bringing in from out of state. And if that revenue is not there, that's just going to be another drag that we have to make up locally.
Anything you would add, Ashley, is an alarming number?
I would agree with Jerry, and the alarming drop in revenue over the next 60 days could be really hard to come back from. So I'm hoping that is a short-term problem and not a long-term problem, but it was very alarming to see all that red whenever we first looked at it.
To your point, Jerry, the last poll question was drew out the answer that people want to see a vaccine come forward, and that is really kind of singling out that as the answer to our economic recovery once that happens and these cases can be stabilized.
Yeah, hopefully so. Hopefully there's a vaccine sooner rather than later, and hopefully by the time that arrives, that the domino effect hasn't already started to impact the economy, and we can have a V-shaped return.
Let's talk workforce and hiring real quick, and then I'll get to some of our questions through the chat. Again, if you have anything you'd like to ask Jerry and Ashley from the presentation, from the data that you saw, or even these poll questions that you're answering here, please type it into the chat and I'll read them off. But the hiring outlook, it's really been interesting to watch from last year. The skills gap, really, that drum kept beating as we worked through the survey results and just interviewed and talked to people for our forums. It still seems to be there, and maybe is exacerbated now. What's your take on job prospects, and for more so, I'm asking for companies that need to fill some seats. How do they go about doing that based on what we see here?
I was going to say, it's such an interesting thing to look at, because as we saw in the survey, 40% of businesses are having to reduce hours or close in some way. And so while workforce is a huge issue and we don't have enough of it, there are now going to be people in the market for jobs. And so I think that presents an interesting conundrum of, is that going to change the way we hire? Is that going to put some more people in the marketplace that weren't available before? And I think it's a conversation that we need to have about how are we going to hire once this pandemic passes.
Mm-hmm. I think there's an opportunity that the big may get bigger. That is, if you're well capitalized and short-term revenue impacts are just kind of a bump in the road, you can take advantage of the opportunity that some skilled labor is now available that would not have been any other way. And if you are in a position where you can take advantage of that, and we get into a strong economic recovery here in the next 12 months, those companies are probably going to be big winners in the very near future. Every major crisis this country has ever faced has caused there to be a new set of winners and losers arise every single time. And it's all on how we place our bets right now. And unfortunately, in a sea of uncertainty, there's no real good direction or knowledge, so it really is a bet. But those that bet correctly will be benefited tremendously here. And I think skilled labor is probably the single biggest chip.
Thank you for that answer. Interesting to see the word cloud behind us here, and the key words that people see as most important to the conversations in reaching economic recovery: safety, cooperation, respect, stimulus is in there. I want to transition to an audience question or two. This one refers to something you mentioned, Jerry, that you are conducting weekly consumer research as well. What similarities and differences are you seeing between local data and national data? Remember the cash on hand difference. We're in a better position locally than nationally at 12 weeks versus 4 weeks. What other differences is there between the local and national sets?
They parallel fairly well on the questions that are the same. I honestly don't know of any that were vastly different, but the nature of a consumer survey is pretty different than from a business. Because it's asking things like this week we were talking about, if a vaccine was proven safe and it was available, would you get it? And we were pleasantly surprised that in our survey, the majority were saying yes. But a few weeks ago, we'd ask questions like, which do you fear most on the contact tracing app between Apple and Google? And on that one, there was near even split on whether they would do it or not. but that's the type of questions that we tend to get on, other than the timeline, which was identical. I'm trying to think how many other questions were the same, because cash on hand questions and planning horizon aren't typically things that we're asking.
Yeah, we did have a couple of the same questions, and there were things like concern for your own personal health and safety, concern for your friends and family safety. Those were pretty parallel. The one that was different and is not surprising at all was the concern about the impact on the economy, where 98% of businesses were concerned, but only 88% of consumers were concerned. Both high numbers, but obviously businesses, not surprising, are going to have a much higher concern than consumers are about the economy.
I'm glad she brought that up. She's absolutely right. I just ran crosstabs on the consumer data today and looked at it: high income, low income, high education, lesser education. And really, it didn't matter any way we cut it. The level of concern for both one's personal health and for their friends and family is high, and there really is no statistically significant difference between any of those segments. Age, it isn't even as big as you would think.
And again, we see safety right behind you there on the screen as the most important factor in our economic recovery. Thank you for that question through the chat. And if you have anyone else who would like to ask one, please go ahead and type that in. There's another one here, more of a statement, but maybe you can respond to it. It says the meeting and convention business is completely gone until at least the end of July, and likely for the rest of the calendar year. This part of the travel industry will not look anything like normal until we have a vaccine. Any response you have there?
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we saw in the numbers that you showed, not just travel, business travel in general, but meetings and convention business, trade shows.
Yeah. Group travel, cruises, international travel, air travel starting to come back, but even it's seen a pretty good dip.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little bit of a springboard to what other lasting effects might we see based on the survey results here.
In that same slide that we saw that there's going to be less business travel, fewer meetings, we also saw there's going to be fewer office spaces rented.
Yeah.
Businesses are planning on working from home more and allowing their employees to do that. And I think that's going to change the way real estate and commercial real estate looks in the Springfield area. I even have a hypothesis that because we have such a low cost of living here in the Midwest, if they can work for a bigger company, why wouldn't a person move to Springfield so that they can work for a large company but have that low cost of living? So I think there's going to be a major shift in both the commercial and residential real estate markets as we move forward, if those predictions hold true.
Could change development quite dramatically. But that's a fascinating prospect there when you're talking about working remotely for any company and living in an entirely different city. That could be very appealing for people to live in a low-cost city like Springfield and work for companies in the major metro areas.
Recently saw a national news story on Manhattan that they were talking about all the hundreds of, maybe it was millions of square feet of office space that has been dormant now for months. And they're now starting to repurpose a lot of the office space because they're saying, a lot of this is financial office space, saying they're never going to need it again. And so they're repurposing it and turning them into lofts because Manhattan has a notoriously low inventory of housing. So they're kind of going from one need and taking the opportunity to help fix another.
Different solutions will come out of this. A couple more questions and then we'll have to wrap up. You mentioned access to cash on hand, but is another question maybe as important access to capital, which includes cash, borrowing capacity, et cetera? Do you weigh one over the other, or how would you respond to that?
Well, it's a good question because right now interest rates are low, so access to capital with partners and what have you. I think it's whatever gets you to the next month or whatever gets you to the next period. And my guess is that probably varies by type of business, the sector that you're in. The way we're structured right now and as low as interest rates are, I don't know that I would differentiate. If you can get one at a good return and you have a lot of confidence that your business will be better off in 2021 than it is in 2020, it's probably a good bet.
One more here. Are there competitive advantages we might gain as we work through the emergency? Things we're doing better than other communities that might give us a future competitive advantage? I don't know if that was drawn out in this survey, but do you have other insights maybe?
That's great.
I think, yeah, what we're doing right now is a competitive advantage. The fact that we started the survey last year and we can see what's happening before, during, and after, and we're having the conversations as a community. We're not fighting against each other for everything. We're actually coming together as a community is a very unique competitive advantage for our area. And I think we have to listen to each other and really band together to get through it because other communities aren't going to be doing that.
Answer. I also say just the very act of working through the emerging crisis that we have, there's lots of insights to be learned in what I would call research on research of now that we're opening. I think every business that it is ought to be testing different things to find out what works and what doesn't work. What kinds of changes in behavior are customers willing to entertain and what will they not? The fact is, I am hopeful that there's going to be a vaccine in September or October, which I think are the earliest times that I've heard it. But getting that distributed around the world and putting an end to COVID is going to take a little time. So the point being is anything we can learn right here, right now, we may still be employing next year at this time. And so anything that gives us an advantage in understanding how our customers are going to behave and what they will or won't do, I would advocate doing every test in the world to find out what works, what doesn't, and you just keep doing more of what does, and you jettison those things that aren't working very well. Of course, then you got to test it again because of the way everything's changing. You can't assume, well, we tried it once and it never worked, but we have to take away as many insights as we can right now because if, God forbid, we don't get a vaccine, we're going to need every bit of that information next year. And next year, we're probably not going to be saying, well, we're probably not going to make any money this year, but that's just 2020. That's the pandemic. My guess is 2021 is not going to be that way, whether we have a pandemic that's ongoing or not. I think we're going to have to adjust. And once we get to that point, there's going to be expectations that, we may not be expecting 5 or 6% growth, but my guess is we are going to be expecting profit. And once we get to that point, anything we can learn right now, this year, this month, I think might help us be in a better situation next year if we have to deal with it.
Thank you for that question and all of your questions. There's a couple others that we won't have time to get to right now. I want to be respectful of the hour that we agreed to. And thank you, Jerry, for your presentation. Thank you, Ashley, for your insights in the Q&A portion. And we really appreciate H2R Market Research for the hours that you poured in to produce the results, and thank our readership from Springfield Business Journal for taking the time to answer those survey questions and be a voice, be a part of the conversation. We need each other to get through it and be most informed, and so that's what we're doing here today. And I thank our sponsors, Prosperity Partners, in particular, for being the presenting sponsor of the growth survey each year. And I'm going to conclude with a few dates for you to look out for, to join us for the next round of conversations we have scheduled right now. June 24 as the next forum, likely in this similar structure through a webcast on Zoom, but we also have others spaced out through the rest of the year: July 15, August 26, October 7, November 11, and December 16. in your printed edition or digital edition you received today of the Business Journal, there's an advertisement with each of those dates listed there. I want to refer you to that to get on your calendars, and also look for email communication in the coming weeks as we prepare more of these conversations, and as was said, even possibly another survey just to retake our temperature and see where we're at and what we need to do to move past this. But any other closing remarks from you, Jerry or Ashley?
Thank you so much for having us. We're very happy to be here and present these results and answer any questions anybody has.
You guys did a great job. Thanks for joining us, and thank you to our viewing audience. We'll see you next time.